Some stories are concealed in plain sight, they linger quietly, holding secrets that go unnoticed by those who pass by. This is one such story, a narrative of a family legacy that was long-standing and rich with pride, ultimately shattered in ways no one could foresee. It all began with something seemingly ordinary, a family visit. Two teenage boys, Kaden and Kieran, were sent to spend a few weeks with their grandmother, Viva Evans, while their parents were away on a diplomatic assignment. This visit was meant to be a time for reconnection, for sharing memories, and simply for being together once again. Viva, a woman in her late 60s, had been alone for years, her husband having passed away, her children grown and busy with their own lives, leaving her home eerily quiet. After Jonas's death, the vibrant life she had once known faded into a long period of solitude, where silence enveloped her like a heavy shroud. Her home, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt vast and empty. Yet, she held on to hope that this visit would bring some joy back into her life and help fill the void that had grown deeper with each passing year. As Kaden and Kieran arrived at her home, excitement bubbled up within her. The twins were no longer the small boys she had cherished but rather young men, tall and confident, ready to reconnect with their grandmother. However, there was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere, a tension that was palpable the moment they stepped through the door. Initially, it was subtle, an electric charge in the air that made her heart race and her stomach tighten, but as the days passed, it became more pronounced. The boys settled into her home quickly, bringing with them an energy that Viva had sorely missed. At first, their presence felt comforting, they shared stories, reminiscing about times spent together during their childhood. However, as they lounged about the house, wearing revealing clothing and moving with a casual confidence, an unease began to creep into her mind. They were no longer the innocent children she remembered, they had transformed into young men with an air of boldness that stirred feelings within her she was reluctant to acknowledge. The first few days were filled with laughter and joy, but soon the simple act of sharing meals became complicated. Casual conversations turned into exchanges laced with tension, as the twins began to test the boundaries of their relationship with her. Viva felt herself grappling with an internal conflict, struggling to reconcile her role as a loving grandmother with the emerging feelings she had for her grandsons. It was as if something unspoken hovered between them, threatening to unravel the very fabric of their family ties. Viva had always prided herself on her strong moral values, taught to her by her parents in a strict household where family loyalty was paramount. She had carried those lessons throughout her life, instilling the same sense of integrity in her own children. But since Jonas's death, that firm foundation had begun to crumble. The loneliness that had seeped into her life blurred the lines of right and wrong, making it easier to lose sight of the values she had held dear for so long. As the twins settled into their routines, Viva couldn't help but feel an unsettling attraction toward them. It was a feeling she had never expected, one that threatened to consume her. There were moments when she would catch Kaden's gaze, his confidence radiating, and an unexpected warmth would wash over her. Kieran, too, possessed a charm that drew her in, his quiet strength contrasting with his brother's bravado. The juxtaposition of their youth against her aged frame was jarring, and she found herself grappling with emotions she had not felt in years. One evening, as they all gathered for dinner, the atmosphere shifted once more. The usual warmth of familial affection felt overshadowed by an undercurrent of something darker. Kaden, seated next to her, casually let his leg brush against hers under the table. The innocent gesture sent a jolt of electricity through her body, and she was startled by her reaction. She could feel her heart racing, her palms sweating as she tried to maintain her composure. It was just a simple touch, she told herself, yet it felt so much more, an acknowledgement of the shifting dynamics within their family. As the boys shared stories of their lives, their laughter filled the room, but it was a sound that soon became haunting. The playful teasing, the shared glances, it all served to heighten the tension that had been building between them. At times, Viva caught herself lingering too long on their faces, their youth and vitality drawing her in like a moth to a flame. It terrified her that she was feeling this way about her grandsons, the very boys she had once cared for with all her heart. Days turned into nights, and the internal conflict within her deepened. Each moment spent with Kaden and Kieran made her feel more alive, yet also more conflicted. The past 10 years had been filled with solitude, and now, with their presence, she felt a longing for companionship that had been dormant for so long. It was intoxicating, yet it filled her with guilt. How could she betray her late husband's memory? The love she had for him was still alive in her heart, a constant reminder of the life they had built together. Viva's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, as she attempted to suppress the desires threatening to surface. She wanted to be the loving grandmother who cared for her grandsons, who would help them navigate their teenage years. But the more she tried to push those feelings away, the more they surfaced, tangled with a longing for connection that was becoming harder to ignore. The boys were no longer just her grandsons, they had morphed into something else entirely, objects of her conflicted desires. One warm evening, as they gathered in the living room, the tension in the air grew thicker. The twins were playfully wrestling, their laughter echoing off the walls of the once happy home. Viva found herself watching them intently, a sense of guilt washing over her as she felt her heart race. This was wrong. They were her family, and yet, she couldn't tear her gaze away. There was a magnetism to their energy, a pull that drew her in. Kieran caught her eye and smiled, and in that moment, the air shifted. It was a smile filled with youthful mischief, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared, and yet it felt charged with something deeper. The tension between them hung thick, and she felt as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice, teetering dangerously close to a fall that could shatter everything she held dear. Viva was lost in her thoughts when suddenly Kaden's laughter broke through, drawing her back to reality. She felt the weight of what was happening around her, the very foundations of their family relationships beginning to shake. It was a moment of recognition that filled her with dread. She was on the brink of crossing a line she never thought she would even contemplate. And with each passing day, the reality of their situation grew more complicated, as desire and familial duty clashed in a way that threatened to tear them apart. As the first week of their visit came to an end, Viva realized that the seemingly innocent reunion had taken a dark turn. What had begun as a chance to reconnect was morphing into something unrecognizable and dangerous. She was left to wonder how it had come to this, how the boundaries of love and family had become so distorted, and what it would mean for all of them if she didn't find a way to reclaim control over her heart and mind. The stage was set for a tragedy that would change their lives forever. With every glance, every shared moment, the stakes grew higher, and Viva could feel the weight of her choices pressing down upon her. The 2 weeks they had together were quickly becoming a nightmare, and the consequences of their actions were yet to reveal themselves. Little did she know, the path she was on would lead them to a point of no return, where love, trust, and betrayal would collide in a catastrophic fashion. As the days of Kaden and Kieran's visit continued, the house filled with an unsettling tension that neither Viva nor the boys could quite articulate. What had started as innocent familial affection was quickly morphing into something fraught with complications. The laughter that echoed through the rooms now carried an undercurrent of something deeper, something that stirred within Viva, awakening feelings she had long suppressed. The sense of connection she felt with her grandsons was intoxicating, but it was also deeply troubling. One afternoon, while they were watching television together in the living room, the atmosphere shifted once again. The twins sprawled comfortably on the couch, their presence exuding confidence and a carefree attitude that made Viva's heart race. As she glanced at them, she found herself lost in thought, marveling at how they had grown from the innocent boys she once knew into these striking young men. Their laughter, vibrant and infectious, filled the room, yet it was tinged with an unsettling tension that made her skin prickle. Kieran, with his quiet charm, caught her eye and flashed a smile that sent a shiver down her spine. At that moment, something in the air shifted, and she felt a jolt of awareness pass between them. It was as if they both recognized the unspoken bond that was forming, a bond that straddled the line between familial love and something much more dangerous. Kaden, ever the bold one, leaned in closer, his shoulder brushing against hers, an innocent gesture that sent waves of heat coursing through her. "Grandma, do you remember that time we went to the lake?" Kaden asked, his voice playful yet laced with an intensity that made her heart flutter. "You used to let us skip rocks for hours." His words pulled her back to cherished memories of summers spent by the water, a time filled with laughter and joy. But as she reminisced, she couldn't shake the feeling that the innocence of those moments had shifted. Now, their playful banter felt charged with an unfamiliar tension that left her feeling breathless. "Of course, I remember," Viva replied, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "You boys had such a knack for finding the flattest stones. I never understood how you did it." They shared a laugh, but as the sound echoed around the room, she felt a sense of longing wash over her, longing not just for the past but for a connection she had lost in her loneliness. The familiar ache of desire crept in, making her heart race even faster. She struggled to suppress the feelings that bubbled beneath the surface, reminding herself of her role as a grandmother, a protector of family values. Later that evening, as they sat around the dinner table, the air was thick with unspoken words. The boys seemed more at ease, their confidence radiating as they shared stories about their lives back home. But as the laughter continued, Viva felt the walls closing in around her. It was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore the way Kaden's gaze lingered on her, how Kieran's quiet strength made her heart race. The unspoken connection between them felt palpable, a magnetic pull that drew her in deeper. During dessert, as they enjoyed slices of homemade pie, Kaden playfully reached over to take a piece from her plate. Their fingers brushed, and for a brief moment, time stood still. Viva's breath hitched in her throat as she felt the warmth of his touch. It was innocent in its intention, but the lingering contact ignited a flame of desire that she struggled to control. She quickly pulled her hand away, forcing herself to focus on her pie as embarrassment flushed her cheeks. "Grandma, are you okay?" Kieran asked, his brow furrowing with concern as he noticed her sudden change in demeanor. His eyes searched hers, and in that moment, she could feel the weight of his gaze, both protective and curious. "I'm fine, dear. Just lost in thought," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. But the truth was that her mind was racing, battling against the torrent of emotions that threatened to consume her. The boy's presence was overwhelming, igniting a desire she had buried deep within. It was exhilarating yet terrifying. As the evening wore on, the tension continued to mount. They decided to watch a movie together, settling into the cozy living room. The flickering screen illuminated their faces, casting shadows that danced around the room. Kaden sat on one side of her, Kieran on the other, and as the film played, Viva found herself sandwiched between them, her heart pounding with each passing moment. The movie began to play, a light-hearted comedy that usually elicited laughter, but tonight it felt different. Every laugh, every shared glance, was laced with an electric charge that made her skin tingle. Kaden's knee brushed against hers, and she felt a jolt of awareness that sent her heart racing. She fought against the growing sense of attraction, reminding herself of her responsibilities and the boundaries that should not be crossed. Halfway through the film, Kaden leaned closer, his voice low as he whispered something funny about the characters on screen. The intimacy of his proximity sent a thrill down her spine, and she could hardly concentrate on the movie. Instead, her thoughts drifted to the way his laughter danced through the air, how his presence seemed to fill the empty spaces in her heart. She found herself torn between longing and guilt, desperate for connection yet terrified of the implications. As the credits rolled, the atmosphere shifted once more. The playful banter continued, but now it felt charged with something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified her. The boys exchanged glances filled with mischief, and she could sense they were fully aware of the effect they had on her. In those moments, the familiar boundaries of their relationship felt like they were dissolving, and she found herself questioning everything she believed about love, family, and the nature of desire. That night, as she lay in bed, the weight of her thoughts pressed down on her. She replayed the day's events in her mind, the laughter, the touches, the longing that had crept in and taken root. What had begun as a simple family visit had morphed into a complicated web of emotions. The internal struggle she faced was overwhelming, leaving her feeling trapped between her desires and the values she had lived by for so long. Viva found herself at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take. Could she embrace the feelings that had arisen, or would doing so mean losing everything she held dear? The fear of crossing a line loomed over her, a constant reminder of the potential consequences of her actions. Each moment spent with Kaden and Kieran felt like a tightrope walk, where one misstep could send her tumbling into an abyss from which she might never return. The days stretched on, and as the weekend approached, Viva felt the tension in the house escalating. The twins, fully aware of the power they held over her emotions, began to push boundaries with playful teasing and subtle touches that made her heart race. They were no longer just her grandsons, they were something more, a source of both longing and fear. As she navigated these complicated feelings, Viva knew that the time for action was approaching. She could no longer ignore the growing attraction, the pull she felt toward her grandsons. Each day brought new challenges, new temptations, and she could feel herself slipping further into a realm where the lines between love and desire were blurred beyond recognition. The situation was spiraling out of control, and she realized that soon, something would have to give. Whether it would lead to liberation or destruction remained to be seen, but one thing was clear: the family bonds that had once held them together were at risk of being torn apart by secrets and desires that had no place in their lives. The stage was set for a confrontation with her own heart, and as the days passed, she could feel the tension reaching a boiling point, one that would change everything forever. As the days passed, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly charged. The initial excitement of Kaden and Kieran's visit had transformed into a tense dance of attraction and fear, an unspoken conflict that simmered just beneath the surface. Viva found herself caught in a web of desire, torn between her longing for connection and the moral boundaries that had defined her life for so long. One afternoon, while the twins were playing video games in the living room, Viva busied herself in the kitchen, attempting to distract her mind from the turmoil within her. The sounds of their laughter filled the air, a reminder of the joy they had brought into her life. Yet, as she chopped vegetables for dinner, her thoughts wandered back to the moments they had shared, the fleeting touches, the lingering glances, and the undeniable chemistry that crackled between them. She couldn't shake the memory of Kaden's arm around her shoulders during movie night, or the way Kieran had looked at her with a mixture of affection and something deeper. Each memory stirred a longing within her that was impossible to ignore. She had raised these boys, loved them as her own, and yet now they felt like something else entirely, something forbidden and intoxicating. As the evening approached, she called the boys into the dining room for dinner. The table was set, candles flickering softly, casting a warm glow over the meal. She hoped that the familiar ritual of family dining would help restore some sense of normalcy, but as they sat down together, she could feel the tension thickening once more. The boys exchanged knowing glances, their eyes sparkling with mischief, and she realized they were fully aware of the effect they had on her. Dinner began with light conversation, but it soon became apparent that Kaden and Kieran were deliberately pushing boundaries. Kaden leaned closer, his leg brushing against hers under the table, a gesture that made her pulse quicken. Kieran, across the table, watched intently, a knowing smile playing on his lips as he caught the look of discomfort on her face. The game they were playing was dangerous, and with each passing moment, Viva felt herself slipping further into the abyss. "Grandma, do you remember the time we went camping?" Kieran asked, his voice smooth and inviting. "You told us scary stories by the fire, and we were too scared to sleep." Viva smiled at the memory, grateful for the distraction, but the warmth of nostalgia quickly turned into something heavier. "I remember," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You boys were terrified." Kieran's laughter filled the room, but as it echoed off the walls, she felt the weight of the unspoken words between them. They were not just reminiscing, they were testing her resolve, probing the boundaries of their relationship in a way that made her heart race and her palms sweat. Kaden leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You should tell us another story sometime. We're not scared anymore. We're grown up now." The way he said "grown up" sent a thrill down her spine, and she could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. Viva's heart pounded in her chest, and she struggled to maintain her composure. She was losing control of the situation, and the realization terrified her. The twins were pushing her toward a precipice, and she could feel herself teetering dangerously close to the edge. She needed to regain her footing, to remind them, and herself, of the familial bonds that should never be broken. "Let's not talk about scary stories tonight," she said, attempting to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "How about school? How are your classes going?" But Kaden wasn't ready to let the moment pass. He leaned back in his chair, a confident smirk on his face. "Classes are fine, but they're boring compared to this. Isn't that right, Kieran?" Kieran nodded, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Yeah, this is way more interesting. Right, Grandma?" The way they said her name, with a teasing lilt, sent another wave of heat rushing through her. They were no longer just boys seeking approval, they were young men challenging her, testing the waters of their relationship in ways that made her pulse race and her mind spin. She felt like a tightrope walker, balancing precariously between the desire for closeness and the fear of what that closeness could mean. After dinner, they moved to the living room, where Kaden suggested they play a board game. The familiar activity felt comforting, a throwback to simpler times when family gatherings revolved around laughter and fun. But even as they settled down on the floor, the tension between them remained palpable. The boys exchanged knowing glances, and with every move in the game, there was an underlying current of something more. As they played, Kaden leaned close to her, his shoulder pressing against hers. "Come on, Grandma, you have to make a move," he said, his voice playful yet edged with something deeper. The closeness made her heart race, and she felt a rush of conflicting emotions, excitement, guilt, desire. Right, she murmured, trying to focus on the game but unable to ignore the way his warmth enveloped her. The boundaries of their relationship were shifting, and she could feel herself getting pulled into the undertow of their shared energy. Suddenly, Kieran leaned in as well, mirroring Kaden's proximity, and the three of them were tightly packed together, a tableau of familial intimacy that had morphed into something charged and dangerous. "You have to keep your eyes on the prize," Kieran teased, nudging her playfully. The laughter that followed felt strained, charged with an intensity that made her stomach knot. With each passing moment, the air thickened with unspoken tension. She could feel the weight of their gazes on her, their playful demeanor masking something more profound. In the back of her mind, a voice screamed for her to pull away, to set boundaries and reclaim her role as their grandmother. But another part of her, the part that craved connection, yearned to lean into the warmth of their presence. The game continued, but the stakes felt higher now. Every laugh, every touch, was laden with implications that sent her heart racing. As the night wore on, the playful banter escalated into something more heated. Kaden reached out, brushing his fingers against her arm, a touch that ignited a fire within her. She could feel her resolve crumbling, the walls she had built around herself weakening under the weight of desire. "Grandma, you're losing focus," Kieran said, a playful grin on his face as he leaned closer. "You have to get in the game." Viva's breath caught in her throat as she felt the heat radiating from their bodies. The lines between familial affection and something darker had blurred beyond recognition, and she was teetering on the brink of something she couldn't comprehend. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. Finally, she stood up abruptly, her heart racing. "I think I need a moment," she said, trying to mask her turmoil with a smile. The twins looked up at her with a mix of confusion and concern, but she couldn't stay there any longer, caught in the web of their allure. She needed space to breathe, to think, to regain her composure. She stepped out onto the back porch, the cool night air hitting her like a wave of clarity. The stars twinkled overhead, illuminating the dark sky, and she took a moment to collect her thoughts. The silence outside was a stark contrast to the chaos brewing within. How had it come to this? How had a simple family visit turned into a battleground for her emotions? As she leaned against the railing, she tried to calm her racing heart. She knew she had to regain control, to establish boundaries before it was too late. But the boys were so tempting, their presence igniting a longing she had never expected to feel. It was as if they had opened a door to a world she had long closed off, a world filled with passion and desire that threatened to consume her. Viva took a deep breath, closing her eyes as she searched for the strength to resist the pull they had on her heart. The warmth of their laughter echoed in her mind, and she felt the weight of the decisions that lay ahead. The stakes were high, and she needed to choose wisely. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet, and deep down, she knew that the next few days would be crucial. Would she be able to pull back from the edge? Or would she succumb to the desires that beckoned her, pulling her further into a tangled web of emotions that could destroy everything she held dear? As she stood there, staring out into the night, the realization hit her hard: this was not just a visit, it was a turning point. The choices she made now would define the course of her life and the lives of her grandsons. She had to confront the truth within herself and decide how far she was willing to go to chase the connection she so desperately craved. The air felt thick with possibility and dread, and as the stars twinkled above her, she knew that whatever lay ahead would change everything. The breaking point was near, and she would soon have to face the consequences of her desires. As the days progressed, the tension in the house thickened, suffocating and palpable. What had begun as a joyful family visit turned into an emotional quagmire, leaving Viva torn between her longing for connection and the fear of where those feelings could lead. Each moment with Kaden and Kieran felt charged, filled with unspoken emotions that hovered just below the surface, threatening to spill over into something uncontrollable. On a particularly warm evening, as twilight enveloped the sky, the three of them settled into the living room for a movie night. Kaden and Kieran had just returned from a jog, their youthful energy evident in their flushed cheeks and sparkling eyes. The scent of their exertion filled the air, igniting a familiar warmth in Viva's heart. But as she glanced at them, an ache of longing washed over her, a bittersweet reminder of the emotional turmoil swirling inside. "Hey, Grandma, want to join us for a movie?" Kieran asked, a playful glint in his eye. He held up a DVD with a cheeky grin that made her heart skip a beat. Despite her better judgment, she couldn't resist. "Sure, that sounds nice," she replied, attempting to keep her tone light, even as her pulse quickened with anticipation. As they gathered on the couch, Kaden settled in close to her, their arms nearly touching. The film began to play, but she struggled to focus on the screen. Instead, she was acutely aware of the warmth radiating from the boys, a magnetic energy that seemed to draw her in. Every laugh, every playful jab they exchanged made her heart race, leaving her to grapple with the emotions that had begun to intertwine with her memories of family love. Halfway through the movie, a romantic scene unfolded, and Kaden turned to her, his gaze intense. "Isn't love the best thing in the world, Grandma?" he asked, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. His words struck a chord deep within her, reminding her of the love she had shared with her late husband, Jonas, and the void that had grown in its absence. "Yes, Kaden, love is incredibly powerful," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The sincerity in his eyes made her heart ache, but it also ignited a flicker of something more profound, a yearning for connection that threatened to consume her. As the movie continued, Kieran leaned in, whispering funny remarks that made her laugh, his closeness sending butterflies fluttering in her stomach. The atmosphere shifted, the lines between familial affection and something deeper began to blur. With each playful touch and lingering glance, she felt the weight of her attraction intensify, pulling her closer to a precipice she wasn't sure she could handle. After the film, Kaden turned to her with a casual smile, but there was something more behind it. "Grandma, we want you to know that it's okay to feel things. You can talk to us about anything," he said earnestly, and his words hung in the air like a promise, tempting her to lean into her desires. In that moment, it felt as if the world outside ceased to exist. They were no longer just her grandsons, they were young men offering her an escape from the loneliness that had plagued her for years. But as she looked into their eager faces, the reality of the situation pressed down on her. She could feel the moral boundaries she had always respected fraying at the edges. "Thank you, boys," she managed to reply, her voice thick with emotion. "I appreciate it, really. But I think it's time for me to get some fresh air." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, driven by a desperate need to regain control over her spiraling thoughts. She stepped outside, the cool night air washing over her like a refreshing wave. The stars twinkled overhead, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing inside her. As she leaned against the porch railing, she closed her eyes, trying to calm the racing of her heart. How had things escalated to this point? The connection she felt with her grandsons was undeniable, yet it terrified her to think of where it could lead. A moment later, she heard footsteps behind her. Kaden appeared first, concern etched on his face. "Are you okay, Grandma?" he asked softly, his voice a gentle balm to her frayed nerves. "I'm fine," she replied, forcing a smile, though it felt strained. But deep down, she was anything but fine. The conflict within her was a tempest, battling between desire and guilt, and she feared what would happen if she gave in to the feelings that had begun to take root. Kieran joined them, and the three stood in an uneasy silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavily in the air. The connection they had shared moments earlier felt fragile, threatened by the intrusion of reality. As she looked at the boys, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were all standing on the edge of something dangerous, teetering precariously between affection and something darker. "Grandma, we care about you. You don't have to feel alone anymore," Kieran said, his voice low but filled with warmth. The sincerity in his tone stirred something within her, and for a brief moment, she considered what it would be like to lean into those feelings, to embrace the connection they were offering. But just then, the front door creaked open, and Alicia stepped out, her expression shifting from concern to confusion as she took in the sight before her. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone wary. The shift in atmosphere was immediate, and Viva felt her heart race as she realized how close they had come to crossing an irretrievable line. Kaden quickly replied, just getting some fresh air, attempting to mask the tension in his voice. But Viva could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the flicker of something more lurking beneath the surface. Alicia's gaze darted between her mother and the boys, suspicion creeping into her expression. "Mom, "Are you all right?" she asked, concern lacing her tone. Viva opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain the tangled web of emotions that had arisen during this visit? The truth hung heavy in the air, a secret that threatened to unravel the very fabric of their family. "I'm fine, dear," she finally managed to say, forcing a smile that felt brittle and strained. But deep down, she knew that the moment had passed. The fragile connection she had shared with Kaden and Kieran now felt tenuous, ready to snap under the weight of reality. Alicia's brow furrowed, her intuition clearly alert. "It just seemed like something was going on out here," she said slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly. Viva could feel the pressure building within her. The tension that had bubbled beneath the surface was now at risk of spilling over, and the weight of her secret felt heavier than ever. She glanced at the boys, whose expressions mirrored her own uncertainty. They were no longer just playful grandsons, they were young men aware of the charged dynamics that had begun to develop. "We were just talking," Kieran said, attempting to defuse the situation. "Nothing to worry about, right, Grandma?" "Right," Viva echoed, but the word felt hollow. The truth was that everything was shifting, and she felt the ground beneath her trembling. She had spent so long trying to maintain the image of a loving grandmother, but now that facade was cracking, threatening to reveal the complicated emotions swirling beneath the surface. Alicia studied them, her gaze piercing, as if she could see right through the carefully constructed layers they had built. "Okay, but I need to know that you're both being respectful," she said, her voice firm. "You're still family, and I don't want anyone getting hurt." The gravity of her words hung in the air, and in that moment, the reality of the situation settled in. There was so much at stake, the love they had for one another, the bonds of family that had once felt unbreakable. If they weren't careful, everything could come crashing down around them. After a few moments of silence, Alicia's expression softened. "Let's just make sure we're all on the same page, okay?" she said, looking at each of them in turn. "I want us to be able to talk about anything, but it has to be healthy." Viva nodded, relief flooding through her, but the fear of what lay ahead loomed large. She knew the stakes had been raised, that their familial ties were now hanging by a thread. The weight of her feelings pressed down on her, and she realized that the facade she had tried to maintain was no longer sustainable. As they returned inside, the atmosphere felt different, charged with unspoken tension. The night continued with light conversation, but the shadows of their earlier exchange lingered in the corners of the room. In her heart, Viva understood that the moment of reckoning was approaching. The choices they would make in the days to come would have lasting consequences, shaping their lives in ways they could not yet foresee. In the quiet moments that followed, she reflected on everything that had transpired, the playful touches, the lingering gazes, the growing attraction. Each of these elements intertwined to form a narrative that was both beautiful and tragic. The connection she felt with Kaden and Kieran was undeniable, yet she knew it was steeped in complexities that could shatter their family forever. The next few days would be pivotal. Could she find a way to navigate the treacherous waters of desire and familial duty, or would she succumb to the pull of attraction, risking everything she held dear? As she lay in bed that night, the weight of the world pressing down on her, she knew the time for choices was approaching. The collapse that threatened her world was imminent, and she would soon have to confront the consequences of the desires that had begun to surface. With a heavy heart, she closed her eyes, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. The fine line between love and desire had begun to blur, and she was about to cross into unknown territory, one where the bonds of family would be tested in ways she could never have imagined.